Amendments 1 through 10 comprise what are known as the Bill of Rights, but it's sort of an erroneous title to call them amendments because the word amend means to change or to alter, and the Bill of Rights are actually an integral part of the Constitution itself. And those first 10 amendments, 1 through 10, actually are not subject to change. They are our unalienable rights. And so it is actually a misnomer to say things like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, etc. It's actually the first right, the second right, all the way up to 10. The 11th Amendment would be the First Amendment because that's the first time the Constitution was changed. Our basic rights are not subject to change, they are not amendments. They were ratified during the Constitutional Convention, not after the passing of the Constitution. They are an inherent part of the Constitution itself. And we, as tax-paying citizens, are entitled to our rights to life, liberty, and property as laid out in the Constitution. So, a little historical background to the Bill of Rights. Um, it emerged during the Constitutional Convention, as I said, and the reason for their existence was that the delegates there wanted a protection of certain basic rights from a federal government. Now, Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist Party were initially actually against the Bill of Rights because they didn't think it was necessary to have an enumerated list of rights to protect that which the federal government was not specifically given power in the first place to revoke. Another thing that worried Hamilton was that if the Constitution had an enumerated list of rights, he was worried that that list would become our only rights. And so it would actually, counterintuitively, limit the rights of the individual. Now, eventually, obviously, the Anti-Federalists actually won this debate, and so the Federalist Party was brought around into supporting a Bill of Rights. And so, eventually the Constitution got ratified in 1789. And as I said, the Bill of Rights is an inherent part of the Constitution. It was never changed. They're not amendments. We call them amendments, and I feel like that has made people think that our rights are sort of variable or sort of not. And you see it in the way people address our rights, that they don't really embrace them as 100% unalienable. They're never separated from the individual. You are always entitled to your rights to life, liberty, and property. And the federal government, their role, at least on paper constitutionally, is to protect those rights. So in today's video, I just want to run down our 10 constitutional rights. So first up is Amendment 1, Right 1, whatever we want to call it. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All right, so obviously this is free speech, separation of church and state. Now, this protects both the state from religion and also the religion from the state. And typically, when people talk about religion, they only mean Christianity. This is obviously any religion, any religious practice, even atheism. However, I do want to digress a little bit and say my personal belief is that atheists are the biggest of hypocrites when it comes to religion. Now, atheism to me would absolutely necessitate survival of the fittest and nothing else. Now, I don't want to get too deep into it. I do want to eventually have a second channel where I talk about theology and religion and all that. But I don't think it's really appropriate to talk about on this channel because this is mostly history and civics. But that is my opinion on atheism. Now, if you look at justice, right, Socrates defines justice as the interests of the weak by the strong. When someone in power not any political power, just in a more powerful or more dominant position, takes an interest or takes a care to those below in weaker positions. That is Socrates' definition of justice. In an atheistic world where there is uh, no deity at all, I don't understand where the strong taking a care for the weak comes from in nature. Nature is all about survival of the fittest and the strong dominating the weak, and I just don't understand how justice is possible. Uh, Therefore, I feel like justice would be, in an atheistic model, just a delusion. It's a fantasy, it's a fairy tale, and it's something that doesn't exist in nature. So, in order for us to be a republic under God, any God really, with liberty and justice, I feel like America needs to be founded on some kind of spiritual basis. Not necessarily Christianity, um, but something. Like we have to have some kind of idea of a higher good that exists just for itself. They say that, the good is its own reward. And I just don't understand why nature would reward something like that. In other mammals, in animal species, it's all about survival of the fittest. Now, the second part of the first right, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. This absolutely applies to cancel culture. Social media and all that should constitute the press. That constitutes your right to free speech, and it shouldn't be censored or canceled the way it is. And fake news, cancel culture, has been a problem of the media for our entire history. You go back to the problems of yellow journalism. An example of this would be the Spanish-American War. The naval ship, the USS Maine, was stationed off the coast of Cuba, and there was an explosion, and it destroyed the ship. And yellow journalists ran with it, saying that the Cubans, which was at the time they were still occupied by Spain, so that Spain had blown it up, and that wasn't the case. And that ultimately led to the Spanish-American War, which was good for us because we won and we gained some territory, but it was also sort of dishonest. You can look at things like Tulsa Race Riot, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the weapons of mass destruction. The news has never really been completely 100% honest. A free press would allow for freedom of information from any source. So it allows for independent journalists, whistleblowers, etc., people on social media to give their opinion and maybe even challenge the state narrative. And so it's a very important right that we have. And it's a shame that these people who support cancel culture can't see the greater sacrifice that they're making. That when you say things like, "Oh, that's just a guy on the internet," like we are all guys on the internet. It's 2022. Every human being is on the internet. But just because you're some guy on the internet doesn't mean that you should be censored or canceled, and it doesn't mean that you don't have anything valid to say. People who say that are just protecting the state narrative. And then the last sentence of that first right, Congress shall make no law prohibiting the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, as I said in the previous video, the definition of peaceful just means orderly. It's usually implied that this means your right to protest. It's not necessarily your right to protest. People shopping at a Walmart is a peaceful assembly. Now, during the lockdowns, this was stopped. You couldn't just go anywhere you wanted to. And again, that's a complete violation of our rights that half the country was totally okay with. Our rights are not amendments. They're not subject to change. And you shouldn't just be allowed to just shut the country down like that. That's a complete violation of our rights. Now, the second part of that last sentence, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. A redress is just a compensation or a remedy. So you're allowed to, like, for instance, get a bunch of signatures and send it to the government. The first right doesn't really give you the right to protest the way we think it does. You're allowed to peacefully assemble and you're allowed to petition the government. So when you see like picketers outside of business, that's not necessarily granted to you by the Constitution if you're on someone else's property, because the government is supposed to protect people's private property. And if you're on public lands, then I mean, I'd imagine you'd have to get some sort of okay from the local government that is there. You can't just show up. You can't do stupid shit like block highways, block freeways. You don't have the right to stand outside a business. Let's say you're a vegan and you want to stand outside of McDonald's. You can have the right to voice your opinion and to create media to sort of sway the public opinion, but you can't just stand outside of business, or even vice versa. Let's say if I was against veganism, I can't stand outside of a vegan, food store on their property. That is actually not a part of our rights. Now, of course, you have the second right. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This, in my opinion, is our most important right. There is no other invention that is more important and more beneficial to the development of human society and of individual liberty than the gun. Without guns, you don't have freedom, period. If you don't have the right to defend yourself, you're defenseless, and people are not just going to give you rights because they should. You have to stand up and declare your independence, and that is impossible without firearms. And furthermore, a lot of people think that the second right is about guns. The second right is not about guns. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The second right is actually giving you the right to join a militia and defend yourselves collectively from a tyrannical state. That's why they're always coming after this. They don't really give a shit if you have a gun. What they want is they don't want you to peacefully assemble and have a well-regulated militia. I have no idea why anybody would be against gun ownership. I also don't understand why anybody would be against forming a militia. Like, I don't know in what world governments do not have the potential to become tyrannical and take away people's rights. On the flip side, I also don't know why people are so against the idea of a military-industrial complex. I've never understood, when I go down to like the gun range, you see everything up for sale, you see all these clothings, and they have, obviously they have guns, ammo, they have shooting ranges. I don't understand how that's not a military-industrial complex. And also, I think that this really just comes from how shitty the conflict in Vietnam was. I think if you look at other events in history, it's not as easy to just be like military-industrial complex. So, for instance, the Perry expedition. During the presidency of Millard Fillmore, Naval Commodore Matthew Perry was tasked by Congress and the president to open up trade relations with Japan, and he was given 2 naval warships, and they went over there. Now, Japan at the time was in their period known as the Tokugawa Shogunate, and so people, which had a very strict social hierarchy, and so people at the bottom, the commoners, the peasants, the artisans, the merchants, these people had virtually no rights, and they were not allowed to own weapons to defend themselves against the ruling samurai class. Matthew Perry goes over there, they open up, they start giving the peasants their weapons, and they overthrow the Tokugawa Shogunate, and that period of Japan turns into the Meiji Restoration period. We like to watch anime and stuff like that and think that samurai are like these noble warriors, which, I guess they are, but in reality it was a very oppressive regime. And it was the military-industrial complex that went over there and opened it up and gave more rights to the people. Now, the Meiji Restoration period ends with Imperial Japan and World War I and II. But those people would not have been given rights were they not able to defend themselves with firearms. You can also look at countries like Israel and Taiwan. Both Israel and Taiwan were sort of protectorates of the United States as a result of World War II. Obviously, everybody knows Hitler killed all the Jews. After the war, they were given Israel to return to their homeland, form an independent state. That state exists with American arms. We give them weapons, we give them aircraft fighters, etc., whatever they need to fight off, terrorists and other groups. When you look at Taiwan, Taiwanese history is not as told in the American narrative, but Imperial Japan invaded China years before Hitler invaded Poland. Sometimes this is not referred to as World War II. This is referred to as the Second Sino-Japanese War, Sino being the Latin word for China. However, when Japan did invade China, there were two sides: the communists, led by Mao Zedong, and the Chinese nationalists, the Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek, who was more of our ally in World War II. At the end of World War II, these two parties would have a civil war. This is the Chinese Civil War. And the nationalists, the Kuomintang, were forced to retreat to Taiwan, where they are today. And the communists, under Zedong, was never able to invade Taiwan, the Republic of China, because of American military presence in the region. Specifically, we give them weapons to defend against an assault, which is why to this day, China still can't invade Taiwan. They need to do things like control the Democrats to get our military out of that area, to get our weapons out of that area, to leave Taiwan more vulnerable. And I don't understand why the people do not support Taiwan even more. Because I feel like when it comes to Hitler and the Nazis, there's no end to how evil they are. But when the Japanese go raping the Chinese and putting them in crazy fucking Unit 731 human experiments, that gets brushed under. And that's because of post-war agreements between Democrat President Harry Truman and Japan. Another country where this dynamic is also seen would be in a country like Thailand. We give a lot of weapons to Thailand, and that is to defend themselves from China, who is like a huge dominant factor in the entire eastern coast of Asia forever. The Tulsa race riot would also be a good example of a well-regulated militia. So out in Tulsa, you had a very large black population. Fun fact about how those black people got in Tulsa. When President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830 to remove the 5 civilized tribes and send them out to Oklahoma, those civilized tribes had already fairly assimilated into culture, and being in the South, part of that culture was owning black slaves. So when Democrat President Jackson forced them to march to Oklahoma, they actually brought their black slaves with them. So that's actually how Tulsa became so heavily populated with black people. Now, later on, it became a sort of financial center. Black Republican Booker T. Washington had formed the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. And so a lot of educated blacks who were now using that education to make money as lawyers, teachers, accountants, etc., they also moved out to Tulsa. And so this became, a pretty good area for black people. It was, very rich. They had a lot of money. They had a lot of education. And so that area became known as Black Wall Street. Oklahoma, which was a Democrat state at the time, because only Democrats occupied Wall Street and burned down black businesses, they decided to get together and attack Black Wall Street. So what Black Wall Street did was they got together and they got all their guns and they formed a militia. And that's how they were actually able to fight off the whites who were attacking them during the Tulsa race riot. And then Republican President Warren G. Harding sent out the National Guard to settle it down, which is something that Donald Trump did not do during the 2020 race riots that burnt down a lot of businesses and stuff in Minnesota and et cetera, where he should have. But it was still the fact that they got together in a militia to fight off those people. Had they not had the right to do that, they would have been completely destroyed. Their businesses, which had already been burnt down, would have been completely wiped out. So, were it not for the black militia defending the black people of Tulsa, that would have been the Tulsa race genocide, not race riot. Now, it does say that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Keeping and bearing arms. Even though I disagree with it, states do have the right to be complete Nazi dickheads about your right to transport weapons or to hunt or any of that. States do have the ability to set up, hunting laws, make it, ridiculously absurd to transport weapons, whatever. But no state can infringe upon your right to keep and bear arms for a well-regulated militia. And so this is what they're really coming after, when dumbass Brandon says something like, you don't need an AR-15 to hunt deer. That's actually right. However, it's irrelevant because you have an AR-15 to defend yourself in a militia. It has nothing to do with hunting or anything like that. So, right number 3. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. This is completely irrelevant without your right to have a gun. If a bunch of soldiers come to your house and they say that they want to, occupy the barn, occupy your house, whatever you want, you could tell them no, but if you don't have the right to defend yourself, that's completely irrelevant because those soldiers are getting in. And furthermore, the second right is about a militia. So even more so, the people of that town theoretically should all get together to protect all of your property. Now on to the 4th right. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Very simple. This is our right to privacy. We are secure in our persons, our papers, our houses, and I would say our data, being in the 21st century. The federal government is supposed to be protecting your data and your online privacy against corporations or foreign governments who have an interest in doing that. So, like, for instance, like with China with TikTok, if they are stealing our data, it's supposed to be up to the federal government to protect our privacy as tax-paying citizens. And it's very interesting to know that, the second right says shall not be infringed, and here it says it shall not be violated. So again, like our rights are not subject to change, they are unalienable, they shall not be infringed, they shall not be violated. And I see things sometimes that we need an online Bill of Rights. No, we don't. We need our Bill of Rights online. We already have the right to privacy. We just need that to be applied universally and unalienably, if that's a word. And so there is no need for a separate online Bill of Rights. We just need the Bill of Rights. And then the second half of that is the need for a warrant. So obviously, like, the police cannot just, knock down your door and search your shit without a warrant. And that is to prevent unreasonable search and seizures. And that includes our data. The police can't just ask a corporation to give you or to give them your data without a warrant unless there is a reasonable suspicion. Keyword, reasonable. All right, so the 5th right. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. All right, so there's a little bit in there. Basically, this is your rights of persons. Um, you don't. The government can't just charge you for no reason. They have to present their case in front of a grand jury and actually get a an indictment held against you. You can't be held for double jeopardy. What double jeopardy is say you've been accused of a crime and you are found innocent of that crime. You cannot be put on trial again for that same crime. And of course, your right to plead the fifth. You shall not be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against yourself. So if you're ever on trial and they ask you a self-incriminating question, you do have the right to plead the fifth. You don't have to answer that question. This is one of the times when life, liberty, and property is used in the Constitution, not pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness is found in the Declaration of Independence, which predates the Constitution and is not actually a legally binding document. That's more of like a spiritual, cultural idea. Pursuit of happiness is basically the freedom of opportunity. We are the land of opportunity. My personal opinion is that this would warrant the death penalty because it says that the government can deprive you of life, liberty, and property. And this is basically how jails work. What differentiates liberty from freedom is that liberty is sort of given to you by the state. Your freedom exists naturally. But I would say that it says right here that the government can deprive you of your life with due process. And the last part is eminent domain, which is where the government can take your private property for public use with just compensation, which is, of course, subject to the government. So let's say you have like a big ass farm, the government can take a portion of that if they want to build like a highway or something through it. They're supposed to pay you for that, but they do have the right to, take your life, liberty, and property with a due process. Now on to our sixth right. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So this is a right to a speedy and public trial, a public defender, and also the right to trial by jury. Now, there's one interesting thing that I see in society, which is where if people are called for jury duty, which is sort of, a hassle, I get that, but the impulse seems to be to try and get out of it. And it's weird because if everyone in society tries to get out of being a juror, then essentially you no longer have trial by jury. The Sixth Amendment becomes void through just sort of apathy. People don't want a public jury of their peers. And so if nobody shows up to jury duty and everybody tries to get out of jury duty, then who's going to be in the jury? As time goes on, we might see that dissipate and the state will be the jury. Or you would have a select small group of jurors, like juror will become an actual occupation. And I guess one of the things that worries me is that, will this right become null and void just by sheer apathy and people, getting out of jury duty? It's a pain in the ass and stuff like that, but wouldn't our rights be more important? Shouldn't the right to a public trial, to a fair public trial, be more important than getting out of jury duty so that you can spend a day doing what? Probably nothing. Now, if you are like really busy in life and stuff like that, then I could see you trying to get out of it. But I don't know. I just feel like people should hold that to a higher standard, and like the concept of having the right to a jury should supersede our desire to sort of just kind of fuck off for a day. That's just me. So number 7. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. So this is basically just applying those same rights to a federal court to a civil court. Number 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So this is pretty easy. We're not going to torture you. We're not going to put you in a dungeon and tie you up to the torture rack. We're not going to put a ridiculously unpayable bail on you. And we're not going to give you ridiculous fines. So 9 and 10 are coming up. To me, these are very important in pretty much any current political debate. We're talking about drugs, abortion, or anything like that. The 9th and the 10th Amendment really apply to most issues today, I feel. So, Amendment number 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So this is basically what I was mentioning at the beginning, where Alexander Hamilton was worried that our listed rights, right, the enumerated rights in the Constitution, would become our only rights. And so therefore, like, the government could kind of manipulate things, manipulate wordings to limit our rights that way. And I also want to say that it says shall not be construed to deny or disparage. So we have shall not be infringed, shall not be violated, shall not be construed to deny or disparage. And then the final right in the Bill of Rights, right number 10, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Very simply, this is states' rights. Anything that is not specifically given to the federal government in the Constitution is automatically reserved to the states. And this is why I feel like the 9th and the 10th rights are so critical to current political issues. Because it shouldn't really be about your feelings or about what you think or your opinions. It should only be about the Constitution. And the federal government is given certain powers where they should be allowed to act. And if they do not have the right to act in certain situations, then it's automatically reserved to the states and to the people. It's weird to me that the Constitution really made for the best of times. You know, America really is a great country that protects the rights of the individuals when it is run by people who believe in it. This is a republic, right? This is a republic with liberty and justice for all. And you have people who do not believe in concepts of justice and of liberty and of republicanism. And so we've seen that the Constitution has made us the greatest society on earth. It's created the best of times. And unfortunately, the best of times have given way to the weakest of men. And these people view our rights simply as subjective, and they will sacrifice those rights for short-term pleasure, for short-term gain. And it's just a shame, because that's what makes this country so great, is the fact that that's why people come here. They come here because our rights are enshrined in law, and they are unalienable from the individual, given to us by our creator, Odin. It's just a shame. I hope that, you know, in the future, the next generation will actually embrace their rights as individuals, and also embrace the good things that, you know, society has done. You know, not everything, I know a lot of people aren't going to believe this, but not everything the government has ever done is bad, or, you know, it's just like anything else in society. It's run by people, it's flawed, but if we get the right people in there and the people are aware of their rights, aware of values, aware of higher ideals like justice, then I really do believe that, a republic representative of people like that will be able to bring about liberty and justice, you know, in the world. And America has done that. And I know there's a lot of people who only know like three things. They know the Civil War, World War II, and Vietnam. And, you know, the world is much bigger, much broader than just the two or three things that the average person knows. All right, but I thank you guys for watching. I know that these videos can be a little lengthy. I try to keep them short, and I have a tendency I could just kind of rant on and stuff like that. But I do appreciate each and every one of you watch my videos. Hopefully, you find them entertaining. You find them educational. Hopefully, this may have changed your outlook on the Bill of Rights. But thank you. So if you like this video, please like, subscribe, get notified. Thank you guys.